piercing shriek that ripped through the oppressive silence of our home was a sound I knew intimately, a memory etched into the very fabric of my soul. It was the sound of my sister, Ilara, discovering that her world had been stolen. From my place in the shadows of the upstairs landing, I watched the familiar tableau of chaos erupt below. Ilara, a crumpled vision in pale pink silk, was already delivering a heart-stopping performance of grief, her wails bouncing off the cold marble of the foyer. My mother, a seasoned actress in our family's long-running tragedy, had a hand pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with a practiced horror as she leaned against my father. He, in turn, was turning a fascinating shade of crimson, sputtering into the telephone at some poor, unsuspecting police dispatcher on the other end of the line. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The only difference was the cold, satisfying calm that had settled deep in my bones. This time, I was not a victim of the tragedy. I was its silent, patient architect. They were screaming, crying, and raging over a velvet-lined jewelry box. It was a monstrously ornate thing, custom-made to house the treasures that defined Alara's existence. It held the heirloom diamonds that were supposed to have been half mine, the sapphires my parents had bought her for graduating middle school, the pearls they'd gifted for winning a regional tennis match. Every glittering stone was a testament to her worth and my lack thereof. Now that box and its contents were gone, vanished into the night. And I, the family ghost, had watched the thief come and go, and had done absolutely nothing to stop him. In my first life, my existence had been a cautionary tale whispered in the spaces between Alara's triumphs. She was the sun, a blazing, brilliant star, around whom our entire family orbited. I was the cold, empty space she left in her wake. Our home was not a home, it was a stage, and every day was a new performance of the wonderful and talented Ilara, featuring her drab and disappointing sister, Serafina. She received custom gowns for school dances. I was told to make do with her cast-offs from 2 seasons prior. She was praised for a B+ on a test. I was berated for an A that could have been an A. The disparity was a constant, grinding pressure that had shaped me into a creature of apologies and averted gazes. The ultimate symbol of this disparity was our grandmother's jewelry. Grandma Iris was the only person who had ever truly seen me. She had smelled of lavender and old books, and her eyes, the same deep gray as my own, had always held a spark of understanding. She had promised me that her collection, a stunning array of diamonds from a bygone era of elegance, would be my anchor, a reminder that I came from a line of strong women. Her will was explicit. The collection was to be divided equally between her 2 granddaughters upon her passing. I remember the day the will was read. I was 16. We sat in a stuffy lawyer's office, the air thick with the scent of leather and my mother's cloying perfume. When the clause about the jewelry was read, a triumphant smirk flickered across my mother's face. Later that evening, my parents sat me down in the living room, the same room where Alara's empty pedestal now stood. "Serafina," my father had begun, unable to meet my eyes. "Your mother and I have discussed it. We feel the jewels would be safer with Ilara." "Safer?" The word was a choked whisper. "Darling, be reasonable," my mother had chimed in, her voice a silken weapon. "You are so terribly clumsy. You lose things. These are irreplaceable heirlooms. Ilara has the poise, the grace, to carry them. They would be wasted on you. People would think they were fakes anyway." And that was that. My inheritance, my grandmother's promise, was handed over to my sister as if it were a trinket she had earned. They had the entire collection reset by a trendy, overpriced designer, transforming grandmother's classic, elegant pieces into gaudy, modern monstrosities that Ilara could flaunt at parties. I watched her, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, as she dripped with the legacy that should have been mine. She wore my birthright on her fingers, around her neck, dangling from her ears, and with every flash of light off a diamond's facet, my own light grew a little dimmer. The robbery in that first life was the final, crushing blow. The thief was Alara's boyfriend of the month, a charming parasite named Julian with a handsome face and a crippling gambling addiction. He knew her schedule, the layout of the house, and the value of what was in that box. But the truth was inconvenient. It was far easier for my family to create a narrative that starred me as the villain. You left the back door unlocked, Alara had shrieked, her face contorted with a vicious glee. You've always been jealous. You probably told him where it was. The accusation, baseless and cruel, stuck. My parents, eager to deflect from Alara's poor judgment in choosing a partner, latched onto it. I became the pariah, the in-house saboteur. The daily barrage of accusations, of cold shoulders and whispered insults was a form of psychological torture. They wore me down day by day until I was a fragile, hollowed-out shell. The end came during a screaming match at the top of the stairs. My mother had called me a worthless, spiteful child. I had turned to leave, my eyes blurred with tears, and my foot slipped. I remember the sensation of falling, the brief, shocking moment of weightlessness, and then a blinding flash of pain. My last conscious thought was of my grandmother's face, her eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. And then I woke up. Not in a hospital, not in an afterlife, but in my own sun-drenched bedroom. I was 16 again. My hands were unscarred, my body was whole, and the air was filled with the scent of the blooming jasmine from the garden. It was a spring morning, exactly 1 year before the robbery. The memories of my other life, of the abuse, the robbery, the fall, they weren't a dream. They were a brand on my soul, a perfect, horrific roadmap of the year to come. For a week, I was a ghost in my own life. I moved through the house in a state of muted terror, the phantom pain of my death a constant ache in my bones. I watched my family, their faces and voices so familiar, yet now overlaid with the knowledge of what they would become, what they would do to me. The love I had once desperately craved was gone, burned away by the fire of my final memories. In its place, something new and unfamiliar was taking root, a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel reinforcing my spine. I had been given a second chance, a year of grace. I would not waste it trying to win their affection. I would not be their victim again. They had used my inheritance to destroy me. This time, I would use it to destroy them. The decision to act was not a single lightning bolt moment, but a slow, dawning realization that my only path to survival was through meticulous, calculated revenge. My first instinct upon returning had been a frantic desire to change the future, to simply prevent the robbery. One evening, a few weeks into my new reality, I tried. Ilara was gushing about her new boyfriend, Julian, the same handsome leech from my previous life. He's just so charming, she sighed, scrolling through photos of him on her phone. And he's not afraid to spend money to show a girl a good time. Be careful with him, Ilara, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He seems reckless. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. And what would you know about it? Jealousy is such an ugly color on you, Serafina. You're just mad that no one would ever spend that kind of money on you. My mother, overhearing from the kitchen, had laughed in agreement. The attempt was futile. They were deaf to any warning, cocooned in their own arrogance. Any attempt I made to stop the robbery would be twisted, and I would inevitably be blamed for knowing about it in the first place. No, I couldn't stop it. I had to let it happen, but this time it would unfold on my terms. My plan began to form, a complex tapestry woven from threads of grief and fury. I needed resources, knowledge, and independence. The first step was money. I found a part-time job at a quiet, dusty old bookstore cafe on the other side of town. It was my sanctuary. I told my family I had joined a study group that met several evenings a week. They barely registered my absence, too absorbed in Alara's social calendar to care. For the first time, I had something that was entirely mine. I worked tirelessly, saving every single dollar, hiding the cash in a loose floorboard under my bed. The work was exhausting, balancing it with the crushing weight of school and the constant emotional minefield of my home. But the growing stack of bills was a tangible representation of my future, of my escape. Next, I needed knowledge. I immersed myself in the world they believed I was too clumsy to inhabit. I spent hours at the library poring over books on gemology. I learned about the 4 C's: cut, clarity, color, and carat. I learned to distinguish between different types of inclusions, the tiny imperfections that made each diamond unique. Online, I enrolled in a jewelry design course, my sketchbook filling with intricate designs that my grandmother would have loved. My hands, once derided as awkward and inept, became skilled and precise. The most crucial piece of my plan was finding a craftsman. My research led me to a man named Alastair Finch. He was a semi-retired artisan who had once made props for historical films, a master of creating illusions in metal and stone. His workshop was a tiny, cluttered space above a tailor's shop, smelling of metal polish and hot tea. He was a small, wiry man with hands gnarled by decades of meticulous work and eyes that seemed to see more than he let on. I approached him with a single, flawless, cubic zirconia I had purchased online. "I need a pair of earrings made," I explained, my voice steadier than I felt. "The design is very specific." I showed him a photograph of the first piece I intended to swap, a pair of simple, elegant diamond studs that Alara wore almost daily. He studied the photo, then looked at the stone, then back at me. "This is a replica job," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "You want me to copy these earrings using this glass?" "It's for a project," I lied, "an art installation about authenticity." Alistair looked at me for a long moment, his gaze unnervingly perceptive. He saw the faint bruises on my soul, the quiet desperation I tried so hard to hide. He didn't press for details. "All right, kid," he said with a sigh, "but my work isn't cheap, and it isn't fast." That was the beginning of our strange partnership. For the next 10 months, I became a regular visitor to his dusty workshop. The process was painstakingly slow and nerve-wracking. The first swap was the hardest. I waited for a weekend when my parents took Alara on a shopping trip to the city. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crept into her room, the silence of the house amplifying every creak of the floorboards. I opened her jewelry box, my fingers trembling as I lifted the real diamond studs from their velvet slot. I replaced them with Alistair's perfect replicas. Holding the real diamonds in my palm felt like reclaiming a piece of my own stolen soul. I fled the house, my mission accomplished, and secured them in a safety deposit box I'd opened with my earnings. I was shaking, but I was also filled with a dizzying, triumphant thrill. I had done it. One by one, I repeated the process. The massive tennis bracelet Alara wore to show off her slender wrists. The gaudy, multi-stone cocktail ring she'd received for her 17th birthday. Each swap was a small victory, a quiet act of rebellion. Alistair never asked questions, but I saw a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or respect in his eyes, each time I brought him a new piece to replicate. He became a reluctant mentor, teaching me tricks of the trade, showing me how to handle the delicate settings and clasps. He was the first adult since my grandmother who had ever treated me with kindness and acknowledged my competence. The final piece was the centerpiece of the collection, my great-grandmother's necklace, a breathtaking cascade of diamonds that my parents had modernized into something Alara could wear to prom. It was the most valuable and the most sentimentally significant piece. Swapping it felt like rescuing a hostage. The night I finally placed the real necklace in the cold, safe dark of the bank vault and left the glittering fake in its place, I knew my preparations were complete. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for the curtain to rise on the final act. The night of the robbery, the air in our house was thick with a tense, theatrical energy. Alara was getting ready for a date with Julian, a flurry of silk and perfume. I watched from my doorway as she sat at her vanity, fastening the fake diamond necklace around her throat. It glittered under the lights, a beautiful, perfect lie. She preened in the mirror, oblivious, turning her head from side to side to admire the way the light caught the worthless facets of cut glass. A grim smile touched my lips. It was poetry. Later, as the sounds of Julian's sports car faded down the driveway, I drifted downstairs. The house was quiet. My parents were engrossed in a television show, their attention fully captured. I moved silently to the back of the house, to the utility room that led to the garden. My hand rested on the doorknob. In my first life, this was the door they claimed I had carelessly left unlocked. This time, I made their lie a reality. With a soft click, I turned the deadbolt, retracting it from its housing. I nudged the door, leaving it open just a crack, an invitation to the darkness outside. My part was done. I retreated to my room, opened a book, and waited for the screams to begin. The days following the robbery were a masterclass in my family's particular brand of dysfunction. The police came and went, their expressions growing more tired with each visit. My mother fluttered about, offering dramatic sighs and cups of tea, while my father blustered about the incompetence of the local law enforcement. Ilara was the star of the show, recounting the violation of her privacy with breathless, teary-eyed performances for anyone who would listen. Throughout the interrogations, I was a portrait of calm indifference. "Did you see or hear anything, Serafina?" Detective Miller, a weary-looking man with kind eyes, asked me. "No, Detective. I was in my room reading. I didn't hear a thing until Ilara started screaming." Ilara, of course, tried to implicate me. "She's lying," she insisted, her voice sharp. "She's always been jealous of my things. She probably left the door unlocked on purpose." Detective Miller just gave her a patient look. "Your sister has been very cooperative, Miss Ilara. We have no reason to suspect her of anything." His gaze flickered to me for a fraction of a second, and I saw not suspicion, but a hint of curiosity, perhaps even pity. He could see the dynamics of our family more clearly in 2 days than my parents had in 17 years. My own contribution to the investigation was subtle, but decisive. I knew Julian was foolish and desperate. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist trying to offload the jewelry quickly. On the third day, using a burner phone I'd bought with my cafe wages, I made an anonymous call to the police tip line. "I overheard a guy named Julian bragging at a bar," I said, pitching my voice lower. "He was talking about pawning some high-end jewelry. Said he was headed to the cluster of pawn shops over on the west side." It was all they needed. Within hours, Julian was in custody, caught red-handed trying to sell the necklace to an undercover officer. The news of his arrest sent a wave of vindicated triumph through our house. My parents were insufferable, gloating about Ilara's impeccable taste, which had now been officially valued by the criminal underworld. They were already planning how they would spend the insurance money, on top of getting the jewels back. They were so busy celebrating their victory, they never once stopped to consider the nature of the prize. The day the gemologist was scheduled to visit was overcast and gray, the weather a perfect reflection of the storm that was about to break. The recovered jewelry was laid out on a black velvet cloth on our polished dining room table, a glittering collection of lies. My parents and Ilara were practically vibrating with anticipation. They had invited their lawyer, a clear power move intended to intimidate the police into a swift return of their property. The gemologist, a quiet, meticulous man named Mr. Harrison, arrived with Detective Miller. He nodded politely to my family and immediately set to work, a professional silence descending on the room. He adjusted a lamp, pulled out his loupe, and picked up the first piece, the tennis bracelet. The only sound was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I stood by the doorway, a silent observer, my hands clasped behind my back to keep them from shaking with anticipation. He moved from the bracelet to the cocktail ring, his brow furrowing slightly. Then he picked up the earrings, his expression growing more puzzled. Finally, he spent a long time examining the necklace, turning it over and over under the bright light. The silence stretched, becoming thick and heavy. My father cleared his throat impatiently. "Well," he boomed, "everything in order? They're all there, I trust." Mr. Harrison put down the necklace and removed his loupe. He looked not at my father, but at Detective Miller. Then he turned his calm, serious gaze to my parents. "Sir, ma'am," he began, his voice neutral, "I have examined every piece of jewelry here. While the craftsmanship of the settings is quite good, I'm afraid the stones themselves are not." "Not what?" my mother snapped, her voice high and brittle. "They are not diamonds," Mr. Harrison stated plainly. "They are, without exception, non-precious materials. Cubic zirconia, glass, and some synthetic moissanite. Very high-quality simulations, I must admit, but intrinsically they are worthless." For a single beautiful moment, there was absolute silence. The grandfather clock ticked. A car drove by on the street outside. Then the world imploded. Ilara let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob. "That's impossible. You're lying. Those are my diamonds." "Perhaps the thief swapped them," my mother gasped, pointing an accusing finger at Detective Miller. "This is a conspiracy. You're trying to steal our heirlooms." My father was stunned into a silent, purple-faced rage. He looked from the jewels to the detective, his mind unable to process the information. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times. I stepped forward from the doorway, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the stunned room. I was holding a slim, leather-bound folder. "They're worthless because they're fakes," I said, my voice ringing with a calm authority that silenced them all. "And they're fakes because I replaced every single one of them." I walked to the table and opened the folder. I laid out the documents one by one on the polished wood. "Here," I said, tapping a stack of papers, "are the receipts from Alastair Finch, the master craftsman who created these lovely replicas for me over the past 10 months. And here," I added, pushing forward another set, "are the statements from my own private bank account, funded by a job you never knew I had, showing the payments for his services." Their faces were a gallery of disbelief and horror. But I wasn't finished. I saved the best for last, pulling out a crisp, notarized document. "And this," I said, my voice dropping as I met my mother's eyes, "is a certified copy of Grandmother Iris's second secret will and testament, which her lawyer was kind enough to provide once I explained the situation. It seems Grandmother knew you rather well. She included a clause that you must have conveniently forgotten." I lifted the document and read aloud, my voice clear and steady. "Should my collection of diamonds not be divided equally between my two granddaughters, Serafina and Alara, then, upon my granddaughter Serafina's 21st birthday, full and sole ownership of the entire collection shall legally revert to her. It is my final wish that my legacy be used to provide her with the independence and security she will so clearly require." I let the paper drift onto the table. "You violated her will. You stole my inheritance and used it as a weapon against me. You deemed me unworthy. So I did what you couldn't. I protected our grandmother's legacy. I took back what was mine and secured it from the kind of people you welcome into our home. The real diamonds are safe, and they belong, now and forever, to me." The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a slow, agonizing collapse. The foundation of my family's world, built on wealth, social standing, and the perceived value of those jewels, had been shattered. When the story got out, and it did, whispered in country clubs and charity galas, they became social pariahs. They were not seen as victims of a robbery, but as greedy, foolish people who had been outsmarted by the quiet daughter they had so thoroughly abused. My final conversation with them took place a week later, amidst a sea of cardboard boxes in my bedroom. I was moving out. They cornered me, their faces haggard and desperate. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, grasping need. "Serafina, you can't do this," my father pleaded, his voice raspy. "We're your family. We were just trying to protect the jewelry for you, for the future." "You were protecting it for Alara," I countered, not bothering to look up from the book I was packing. "You made your choice 17 years ago." "But the money, darling," my mother said, trying her old silken tone, but it was frayed at the edges now. "We're in some financial trouble. We were counting on the insurance, on the value of the stones. You wouldn't see your own family out on the street, would you?" I finally stopped and looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw a hollow, frightened woman, her power gone, her mask stripped away. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even sadness. Just a vast, empty distance. "You put me out on the street emotionally my entire life," I said softly. "The fact that it might now happen to you financially is simply the universe balancing its books. Goodbye." I picked up my last box and walked out of that house without a backward glance. Alara's downfall was swifter and more public. Stripped of the glittering armor that had been her identity, she was just a cruel, empty girl. Her friends, who had been drawn to her wealth and status, abandoned her. Her name became a punchline. I heard through the grapevine that she had a breakdown and had to withdraw from the university. Her future, once so bright and assured, was now a bleak, uncertain landscape. My own future, however, was just beginning. I cashed in a few of the smaller diamonds, more than enough to secure a beautiful apartment in the city and to lease a small sunlit studio. I opened my own bespoke jewelry design business, Iris Designs, in honor of my grandmother. My work, inspired by her classic elegance rather than my family's gaudy taste, quickly gained a following. I found that my hands, once called clumsy, could create real beauty. I found new friends, people who valued me for my kindness and my talent, not for my lineage or my bank account. One cool autumn evening, about a year after I left, I had a visitor at my studio. It was Alastair Finch. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, looking around at my work tables and sketches. "I saw your feature in the City magazine," he said, a rare smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Knew you had it in you, kid." "I couldn't have done it without you, Alistair," I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. He just shrugged, but I could see he was pleased. Before he left, I pressed a small, velvet-wrapped box into his hands. "A thank you," I said. Inside was a pair of gold cufflinks I had designed myself, each set with a small, perfect, and very real diamond. Later that night, alone in my quiet apartment, I opened my own vault. I took out the great-grandmother's necklace, the real one. Its weight was cool and substantial in my hands. I fastened it around my neck and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The diamonds didn't feel like a prize or a trophy. They felt like a promise fulfilled. They glittered with the light of a future I had seized for myself. The ghost of the girl who had fallen down the stairs was finally at peace, replaced by the woman who had learned, against all odds, to rise.